Good afternoon, students. Today we are in the second class on Dr. Ambedkar's speech at Mahad. And as I told you in my last lecture, that I would be taking up the text for close reading and discussion today. I have decided to refer to certain important sections of the text so that you can understand the entire context of Dr. Ambedkar's speech, his philosophy of life, and how does he develop the discourse of untouchability, several nuances of the term untouchability, and the prescriptions to remove the evils of untouchability from Indian society. I would first ask you to look at the context of this speech. You would find that there is an epigraph where the context is clearly noted. In March 1927, Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, 1891 to 1956, scholar, political philosopher, and India's foremost civil rights activist, led an agitation by Dalits to draw water from the Chavadar lake in Mahad, Maharashtra. The water of this lake was hitherto reserved for caste Hindus. This historic event brought to the fore the fact that untouchables are not considered human in India. In the second part of the Mahad Satyagraha on 25th December 1927, Ambedkar and his followers burnt a copy of the Manusmriti, a 2nd century BC Hindu law code, as a mark of protest against Hinduism and untouchability. In fact, in this second edition of Mahad Satyagraha, Dr. Ambedkar delivered a historic speech to all other untouchable Satyagrahis who had assembled at Mahad to draw water from Chavadar lake. Now, if we look at the context of the Mahad Satyagraha, we find that it was perhaps the first politically organized and large scale movement for reclaiming indigenous human rights. In fact, the idea of indigenous human rights was in a very nascent and incipient form in the early 20th century, particularly when in March 1927, Dr. Ambedkar had led a peaceful, non-violent protest march to the Chavadar lake at Mahad to draw water from the lake, which was just beside a Hindu temple. What happened? That the upper castes, protectors of the temple, beat up severely Dr. Ambedkar and his followers. And Dr. Ambedkar was injured. Many of the Satyagrahis had to be hospitalized. And later, what happened? Dr. Ambedkar had filed an FIR with the police against those upper caste, security personnel. And what was the result? The result was that all of them were arrested and put behind the bar by the British administration. And you should keep in mind in this context one important aspect of colonial rule in India and its impact upon the Indians in general and the untouchables, that is Dalits in particular. And if you look at this discourse during the colonial period, you will find that Dr. Ambedkar and many other Dalit ideologues were simply branded as pro-British and anti-nationals by many upper caste Congress intellectuals, primarily because of the fact that many Dalit intellectuals had actually supported the reform movements during the colonial regime. Particularly, they supported the British system of not recognizing the caste-based discrimination of Hinduism. And they particularly supported the British proactive nature against the evil of untouchability. That is why the perpetrators of violence upon Dr. Ambedkar and other satyagrahis during that fast movement in March 1927 was not accepted by many upper caste intellectuals. And if you follow the text, that is Dr. Ambedkar's speech, you will find in the second paragraph, Dr. Ambedkar says that many of you will remember that on the 19th of last March, all of us came to the Chavadar lake here. The caste Hindus of Mahad had laid no prohibition on us, but they showed they had objections to our going there by the attack they made. The fight brought results that one might have expected. The aggressive caste Hindus were sentenced to 4 months rigorous imprisonment and are now in jail. If we had not been hindered on the 19th of March, it would have been proved that the caste Hindus acknowledge our right to draw water from the lake, and we should have had no need to begin our present undertaking. So look how Dr. Ambedkar categorically mentions the aversion towards the untouchable castes by the upper castes Hindus. And you would find how Dr. Ambedkar says that the protectors of the Chavadar Lake tank were allowing not only the other caste Hindus but also the Muslims, the birds and beasts, and even the beasts domesticated by the untouchables. But they were against the untouchable human beings. Why? He raises the questions that why do they disallow us to drink water from the Chavadar lake? And thereby we find that Dr. Ambedkar points out the root problem of inequality in Hindu caste-based society. So the prohibition on the Dalit people, the untouchable people, to drink water from the Chavadar lake was solely aimed at maintaining the caste-based inequality of Hinduism. So this prohibition was a symbolic act of inequality, unequal treatment. Next, you would find Dr. Ambedkar says, I refer to page 23. Page 23, this is the third paragraph. It begins with the sentence, it is essential that all should understand thoroughly the answer to this question. Unless you do, I feel you will not grasp completely the importance of today's meeting. What was the question? The question was, why do they forbid us alone? That means, why do the upper caste people forbid us, the untouchables alone, from drinking water of the lake. Now, Dr. Ambedkar says the Hindus are divided according to sacred tradition into four castes, but according to custom into five: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras, and Ati Shudras. Look at the fifth and final category. No, Ati Shudras. So we find that Dr. Ambedkar first refers to the sacred tradition that you find in the Vedas and also in the later Vedas, in later Vedic society, where there was a kind of, we call it Varnasram. Okay, and by Varnasram, we refer to the four major Varnas: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Okay, and you know how it is described in the Purusha Shukta of the Veda, that how the creation was made from the body of Brahma. Okay, and Brahma the creator, and how the head gave rise to the birth of the Brahmins, whereas the limbs gave rise to the birth of the Kshatriya. Okay. And you find how the Vaishyas were created from the thighs and the Shudras were from the feet. And look how in this idea of the image of a Purusha, there is no place for the Pancham Varna, that is Ati Shudra. There is no place for the untouchables. So Dr. Ambedkar says that the idea of untouchability was not there in the Vedas, in the sacred texts. Rather, the idea of untouchability was developed in later ages, okay, particularly through the practice of certain social customs. And these later ages saw the publication of Manu Sanghita. And Dr. Ambedkar and many other Dalit intellectuals accuse Manu Sanghita or Manu Smriti as the root text which was responsible for developing the idea of untouchability, developing the idea of pollution and purity, developing the idea of the Pancham Varna, Ati Shudra. So, Manu Smriti is a kind of social code of law that was validated by the religious scriptures. So somehow this legal codification, okay, wanted to apply the force of religion in order to claim total submission from the untouchable people. So, according to Dr. Ambedkar and other Dalit intellectuals, the idea of casteism, the idea of caste-based discrimination was a much later phenomenon, and it began with the Manusmriti, the controversial text. And next you would find that Dr. Ambedkar refers to certain symbols of inequality in Hindu society. What are the symbols? Okay, number one, intermarriage. Number two, interdining. Number three, interdrinking. And number four, social discourse or intercourse. Social intercourse. So you would find that these important prohibitions or social taboos were actually certain symbols of inequality which the upper caste people.
Please repeat the second one.
Yes, the second, intermarriage, interdining, that is eating, interdining, interdrinking, and social intercourse. social intercourse. So Dr. Ambedkar says that the chief objectives of the upper caste security men in that Hindu temple at Mahad, by not allowing Ambedkar and other untouchables to drink water from the Chavadar lake, was a deliberate ploy to make them remember and feel about their inferior social status. So the main objective was to develop that sense of inferiority. And by instilling that sense of inferiority, they were also wanting to impose the whole discourse of humiliation upon the untouchable people. Okay, they were rather made to feel, social outcasts or renegades. And this principle of social exclusion was deliberately followed in order to sustain the system of graded inequality in Hindu society. Graded inequality, that is hierarchized inequality. And this hierarchized inequality was very important to observe, particularly for the upper caste Hindus, because otherwise these untouchable people might not be forced to do certain ignoble or ignominious social work which no other caste would be willing to perform. So, from one point of view, the entire initiative to not give permission to a certain section of people to drink water from the temple adjacent lake was a deliberate ploy to perpetuate a kind of social structure, discriminatory social structure, which was modeled on a particular objective of keeping the untouchables in a state of slavery or serfdom forever. So you can understand how these symbolic, acts of prohibitions were in a way, okay, an initiative to impose certain things on the one hand, and the attempted non-violent protest by Dr. Ambedkar and his followers was also another counterproductive stance to break free from such taboos or prohibitions. And next, I would like to move to another, part of his speech, that is page 24. Yes, I begin with that paragraph, that is third paragraph. Gentlemen, Dr. Ambedkar addresses, we will understand from this the significance of the struggle we have begun. Do not let yourselves suppose that the Satyagraha committee has invited you to Mahad merely to drink the water of the Chavadar lake of Mahad. It is not as if drinking the water of the Chavadar lake will make us immortal. We have survived well enough all these days without drinking it. We are not going to the Chavadar lake merely to drink its water. We are going to the lake to assert that we too are human beings like others. It must be clear that this meeting has been called to set up the norm of equality. So look how Dr. Ambedkar has imbibed and accepted the spirit of Satyagraha from Mahatma Gandhi. The untouchables have launched a protest march, but they have done it on the principle of non-violence. And look how Dr. Ambedkar describes his committee as Satyagraha Committee. And this Satyagraha Committee is set up to establish the norms of equality. Once again, you know that the three basic ideals of French revolutions were liberty, equality, and fraternity. And if you look at the three major slogans of Dr. Ambedkar, you will find that they were to unite, to educate, and to agitate. These were the three major slogans of Dr. Ambedkar. Now, Satyagraha, once again, calls.
Sir,
Yes, tell me. Do you have
লাস্টের
any
পয়েন্টটা বলুন এডুকেটেডের পর
to unite, to
টু
educate, and to agitate. To agitate, Agitate. Okay, have you followed?
ওকে স্যার
Yes. So the Satyagraha is part of education. Dr. Ambedkar is trying to educate all his followers, the other untouchable members of his society, to understand properly the meaning of Satyagraha. Satyagraha, you know, okay, roughly translating, it means the quest for truth, or agraha may be, no, the desire to know the truth, desire to attain the truth. Now, what is the truth here? The truth here is to achieve a spirit of national unity. The truth here is to achieve the spirit of unity of being. Unity of being means that there is no discrimination in terms of caste. There is no caste-based discrimination. So, Satyagraha means ultimately to realize the truth of oneness, the truth of understanding the basic equality of humanity. So, from that point of view, Dr. Ambedkar says that to uproot untouchability from the Hindu caste system, we must annihilate the system itself. Remember, this is a major argument of Dr. Ambedkar. Okay, he had already written a book on this, The Annihilation of Caste. That Dr. Ambedkar strongly advocates the theory that in order to remove and abolish the evil of untouchability, we must abolish the caste system of Hinduism. We must abolish the caste system of Hinduism, not merely the exemptions on interdining and social intercourse. Dr. Ambedkar says that there are some untouchable people who think that if we lift the ban, the upper castes lift the ban on interdining, that is eating together, and social intercourse, that is speaking to each other. Okay, if they lift these bans, we will be able to achieve some equality. Okay, there is no need to think about other forms of inequality. But Dr. Ambedkar says that if only two bans are lifted, that will be a partial removal of untouchability. In order to remove untouchability absolutely, okay, you have to remove all other prohibitions. Particularly, he emphasizes the importance of uprooting, that is removing the evil of the ban on intermarriage. I have already mentioned that, discussed that, how intermarriage becomes the most important factor in achieving social equality. Intercaste marriage becomes the most important factor to achieve social equality. And look how, Dr. Ambedkar provides certain significant analogies to establish his point that the caste system should be abolished altogether in order to achieve social equality. Okay. Now, what are the analogies? You should keep that in mind. The first analogy is one of the snake. Okay, I refer to page 25. Look at page 25. The second paragraph begins with, gentlemen, you all know that if a snake is to be killed, it is not enough to strike at its tail. Its head must be crushed. If any harm is to be removed, one must seek out its root and strike at it. Look at the analogy, how Dr. Ambedkar compares the caste-based system of Hinduism to a snake, okay, and probably a venomous snake. So, wherein lies the venom of the snake? It lies in the discriminatory practice. It lies in the discriminatory practice. So, the caste system of Hinduism is like a snake, and this caste system, this snake, is to be killed by crushing its head, not by striking at its tail. What does it mean? It means that if you strike at its tail, means if you strike at the removal of certain minor bans like interdrinking or social intercourse, you cannot kill the snake. Its head must be crushed. What stands for the head? Intermarriage. The ban on intermarriage. The ban on intermarriage is like the head of the venomous snake. And if it is crushed, that means if intermarriage, the ban on intermarriage is abolished, only then the snake will die. That means the caste-based discriminatory system will die and social equality can be established. So you understand the analogy, the first analogy, the first comparison between a snake and the caste-based system of Hinduism. Okay. Look at the second analogy. Dr. Ambedkar provides the second analogy. What is that? It is from Mahabharata. Look at that in the same paragraph. An attack must be based on the knowledge of the enemy's vital weakness. Who is the enemy here? The enemy is the caste-based discriminatory system. Okay. So, knowledge must be there of the enemy's vital weakness. Duryodhana was killed. Duryodhana, look in Mahabharata, Duryodhana. Duryodhana here stands for what? The powerful caste system of Hinduism. So, Duryodhana was killed because Bhima struck at his thigh with his mace. Bhima struck with his thigh. Look at the connection between Bhima and whom? Bhima and the untouchables. Yes, the untouchables have to strike against the caste system, the inequality of caste system. And look, Bhima, there is a stunning similarity. Bhima struck at his thigh, and the middle name of Dr. Ambedkar is what? Baba Saheb Bhimrao Ambedkar. So he has the name Bhim in his middle name. Okay, so Bhima, the Duryodhana was killed because Bhima struck at his thigh with his mace. Mace, you know, Goda, mace. Struck at his thigh with his mace. If the mace had hit Duryodhana's head, he would not have died, for his thigh was his vulnerable spot. So look how there is an analogy, there is a comparison between Duryodhana's thigh and the ban on intermarriage. Look at the link between Duryodhana's thigh and the ban on intermarriage. So Bhim struck at Duryodhana's thigh and Duryodhana died because it was his weak point. Similarly, if the untouchables are able to lift the ban on intermarriage, then only the whole caste system will die. Okay, so look at the second analogy. I have explained it. Now look at the third analogy. There is another. No, the third analogy is one of unknown disease. unknown disease, and we can compare this analogy to the present global disaster, okay, the pandemic of coronavirus. Look at the third instance. This is also in the same paragraph, the next line. One finds many instances of a physician's efforts to remove a malady, that is a disease, proving fruitless because he has not perceived fully what will get rid of the disease. Yes, that is exactly what is happening today in the world. No, the physicians are trying with different medicines, different combination of drugs to treat the coronavirus affected patients. But what is happening? That many of the drugs are not responding. And even if the patients are temporarily cured, they are returning once again with new symptoms of coronavirus. Okay. So what is happening? That the doctors are not yet sure completely that which medicine will finally get the people rid of the disease. Similar instances of failure to root out a social disease because it is not fully diagnosed are rarely recorded in history, and so one does not often become aware of them. So Dr. Ambedkar says one very important thing, that we are probably unable to find out the real cause of our suffering. This untouchability, this caste-based discrimination is like a disease. It is not a physical disease, it is actually a social disease. Okay, it's a disease which leads to social exclusion. So, if we think that only interdrinking or say social intercourse will be able to cure this disease, then we are probably living in the fool's paradise. Okay, probably we are wrong. Okay, the real cause of the disease, the root of the disease may be lying in the ban on intermarriage. So if we are able to identify the real cause of our sufferings, only then we can take initiative to weed out, to completely crush, and to completely destroy that cause of our suffering. And then we find the fourth one. There is a fourth analogy, comparison. Actually, it is an allusion which Dr. Ambedkar deliberately uses in his lecture in order to point out how the practice of inequality was also prevalent during the ancient periods and even in Europe in the ancient times. And Dr. Ambedkar refers to the discriminatory practice which prevailed in ancient Rome, an allusion to the ancient Roman practice, and how there was a class-based discrimination. In the Indian context, it is caste-based discrimination, because Dr. Ambedkar had repeatedly said that this caste-based discrimination was typical of the Indian subcontinent. Okay, or to speak in a broader term, it is unique to the South Asian context. Okay, caste-based discrimination, that is casteism, is not found anywhere else in the world. Anywhere else in the world. So as there is caste-based discrimination in the Indian subcontinent, Dr. Ambedkar says, so also there had been class-based discriminations in the ancient times, even in ancient Rome, which was the center of global power. Because at one point of time, Rome was the superpower of the world. No. So even in Rome, there was great class-based discrimination. And there were two major classes, he refers to them. One was the patricians, the upper class, and another one was plebeians, the lower class. And how there was a continuous conflict between the patricians and the plebeians. In terms of what? In terms of the reclamation of power and rights, individual rights, group rights. The patricians used to enjoy all the political and social power and privileges, whereas the plebeians were merely made to serve the patricians. But the plebeians were much greater in number, whereas the patricians were much less in number. But the minority ruled because of their so-called class superiority, and the majority suffered because of their so-called class inferiority. And what happened? That the plebeians finally wanted equality, and they wanted to stage a kind of revolution. And when the patricians sensed danger that the plebeians might stage a revolution, they granted some freedom to the plebeians, that okay, there should be equal law, for the patricians and the plebeians. But once again, the laws were equal, but the people, the executives who had to enforce the laws, all came from the patrician class. Naturally, what happened? The enforcement of law was discriminatory. The patricians were privileged, the plebeians were once again excluded from all the privileges. So what happened? That they decided to hold two separate tribunes. Tribune, tribune is a unit of governance. Earlier, there was one tribune, and when the plebeians persisted that they should also have equal right in administration, equal representation in administration, what happened? That there were two tribunes. One tribune for the patricians, another tribune for the plebeians. But once again, look how even this system was unable to do away with the discriminatory practices. Why? Because the tribunes had to be approved by the god, by the oracle, divine oracle at the temple of Delphi. At the temple of Delphi, the temple of Delphi was the temple of god Apollo. Apollo, who was the god of oracle, the god of learning, the god of knowledge, the god of oracle. So what happened? That in the Delphi's temple, the priest had to put the question, that is the tribune approved by the god or is it not approved by the god? Interestingly, look that the tribune for the plebeians, if it was headed by a person who was sympathetic towards his fellow plebeians, that tribune was not approved by the divine oracle. Whereas, if a person was made to be the leader who also thought about the patricians and rather flattered the patricians, that tribune was approved by the oracle. So why was this discrimination? Now who decided? What will be the answer? The priest. Why? Because how does he put a question? If I say, do you like pizza? You will say that yes, of course. But if I say, I think you don't like pizza, so let me have it. So you don't have any option for any answer. No, because I have already put it in my favor. So there, that the question was put in such a way that the answer came either in the positive or in the negative, but it was predestined. Similarly, what happened that the role of the priest was very important. And what was the role of the priest? That the priest was a person who should be the child of parents who were married in a very unique Roman system of marriage. And what was the name of that system? Conferatio. I have already put that question in my study materials. Yes. What is conferatio? So conferatio is a mode of marriage which existed only among the patricians. So what happened? That a plebeian could never become a priest in the temple of Delphi. So as there was no representation in the selection of the priests at the temple of Delphi, the plebeians could never achieve real equality. So do you understand? Do you understand that how the plebeians could not gain real freedom because they were unable to find out the real cause of discrimination. Rather, they were happy with certain powers and privileges, and they didn't go beyond that. They didn't inquire seriously what was the real cause of their pain and suffering. And I refer to page 26, the second paragraph. It's a long one. It starts with the sentence, the wily priest. Now I move to the middle of this paragraph. Follow the text. Their efforts proved meaningless. There means the efforts of the plebeians. Their efforts proved meaningless because they did not trace the malady to its source. If they had, they would, at the same time that they demanded a tribune of their election, have also settled the question of who should be the priest at Delphi. The disease could not be eradicated by demanding a tribune. It needed control of the priestly office, which the plebeians failed to perceive. We too, while we seek a way to remove untouchability, must inquire closely into what will eradicate the disease. Otherwise, we too may miss our aim. Do not be foolish enough to believe that removal of the restrictions on social intercourse or interdrinking will remove untouchability. So look how Dr. Ambedkar puts great emphasis upon the importance to educate the untouchable people. Education is very important because education will enable the untouchable person to understand the real cause of discrimination and first to unite and then to educate. Okay, Dr. Ambedkar united the untouchable people by creating that Satyagraha committee, and then he attempted to educate those people by delivering this famous speech at Mahad. This speech was essentially an attempt to educate the untouchables about the mechanism of exploitation and discrimination sustained by the upper caste people, and he wanted to educate people, okay, by referring to several forms of disease and several forms of ignorance, okay, as it existed in Roman society, as it existed amongst the plebeians. They were ignorant, they were not properly educated. Had they been properly educated, they would have really questioned the system of selecting the priest from a particular system of marriage. Why? Why should the priest be selected from a particular system of marriage? They should have questioned it. They didn't question it because they were ignorant. So we find that Dr. Ambedkar provides a very important allusion to the ancient Roman practice of conferatio in order to highlight the perpetuation of the system of untouchability, the caste-based discrimination in the Indian subcontinent. And look, next, Dr. Ambedkar provides two different categories of untouchability. The one is untouchability outside home and the other one is untouchability inside home. Now, what are the parameters of untouchability outside our home? What are they? Inter-drinking, inter-dining and social intercourse. These three features are what? Parameters of untouchability practiced outside our home. Outside our home in the public sphere. In the public sphere, the untouchables are not allowed to eat with the upper caste. They are not allowed to drink with the upper caste. And they are also not allowed to speak with the upper caste. No, there was a time, yes, this is not a fictitious story. There was a time earlier, okay, when the untouchable people were not allowed to speak with the upper caste. They were not even allowed to walk on the same road, traversed by an upper caste person. They were not allowed. They were not even allowed to wear, slippers or sandals. Okay, they had to walk barefoot. So there were many such, taboos, many such bans, many such prohibitions, okay, to constantly remind them of their inferior social status. Now look how Dr. Ambedkar is emphasizing the most important aspect of discrimination, that is untouchability practiced in our home. What is that? That is the ban on intermarriage. Ban on intermarriage. Look, I read that last paragraph, page 26. If we want to remove untouchability in the home as well as outside, we must break down the prohibition against intermarriage. Nothing will serve. From another point of view, we see that breaking down the bar against intermarriage is the way to establish real equality. Anyone must confess that when the root division is dissolved, incidental points of separateness will disappear by themselves. And I read the last line of this paragraph, page 27. Dr. Ambedkar puts a question: who can accomplish this task? Who can accomplish this task means that who are able to remove this ban on intermarriage? Who? It is no secret that the Brahmin class cannot do it. The Brahmins cannot take the initiative to remove the ban on intercaste marriage. So you can understand how Dr. Ambedkar is quite confident that removal of the ban on intermarriage is the only effective way to achieve social equality. And at the same time, this removal of the ban on intercaste marriage is the most difficult task to perform, is the most difficult goal to achieve. And who will not do it? Definitely the Brahmins. Why? Look at the second paragraph. Okay, look at the second paragraph where Dr. Ambedkar says that the Brahmins will never willingly give up their sovereign supreme position. They will never allow the removal of the ban on intermarriage. Why? Because that will dilute their caste-based supremacy. And look how there is a comparison between the Brahmins and the samurais of Japan. Okay, look, I read that line. The Brahmins do not have the patriotism of the samurais of Japan. Who were the samurais? Do you know the samurais? Who were the samurais? Have you seen any film on the samurais? Have you seen any Japanese TV shows on samurais?
The combats.
Yes, samurais.
The combats.
Samurai? Yes. The samurais of Japan? Yes.
The fighters.
The fighters.
You do a little bit of Google. What does it tell you? Samurais. The samurais were actually ancient,
Warriors.
warrior class, yes, warrior class of Japan, and they were
The combats.
respected, yes, and venerated. Okay, they were regarded as the aristocrats of the Japanese society. But the samurais, they had a very bulky figure. Okay, but the samurais were also great wrestlers. They were excellent wrestlers. And the samurais were also the most privileged class of Japan. Dr. Ambedkar refers to the samurais in order to draw an analogy between them and the Brahmins of the Indian subcontinent. As the Brahmins enjoyed highest privilege in Hindu society, so also the samurais enjoyed highest privilege in Japanese society. And look, he says, the Brahmins do not have the patriotism of the samurais of Japan. It is useless to hope that they will sacrifice their privileges as the samurai class did for the sake of national unity based on a new equality. So Dr. Ambedkar says that the Brahmins won't accept intermarriage and the Brahmins won't give up their privileges like the samurais. Now, when did the samurai give up their privileges? It was after the World War. You know that Japan was devastated by the World War. You know that the country was devastated. And in order to rebuild the country, in order to reorganize the country, people had to give up their privileges. And the samurais, donated huge tract of their, lands. They also donated a huge amount of funds for the reorganization and reconstruction of Japan. Okay. So the samurais were great patriots. They were great patriots because they sacrificed a lot for their motherland. But the Brahmins won't do that. Dr. Ambedkar argues that the Brahmins won't give up their privileges. They won't go for the reconstruction of a new Hindu society based on the principle of a new equality where there would be no caste-based discrimination. So you understand how Dr. Ambedkar was not at all optimistic about the role of the Brahmins to forego their claims on certain privileges which they enjoyed due to the perpetuation of the system of that ban on intercaste marriage. Apart from that, and this is also very interesting, Dr. Ambedkar says that the other castes will not take any initiative to remove this ban on intercaste marriage. Okay, the other castes means the Marathas, that is the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and even the Shudras. Okay, why? Because Dr. Ambedkar says that the other lesser castes are also anxious to preserve their caste-based identity. They will prefer to maintain a status quo that as it is. They are afraid of any caste-based reforms because that might lead to a demotion or that might lead to sacrificing certain privileges which they have earned through many generations in this caste-based Hindu society of the Indian subcontinent. Okay, so you understand how the lesser castes always suffer from a sense of anxiety. Anxiety of what? Anxiety of giving up their privileges. Anxiety of losing their rights and privileges. So, the other castes like the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras will not help the Ati Shudras, the Dalits, the untouchables, the Panchamas in their struggle to achieve social equality, to achieve social equity. Equity is also a very important word. Equality, it comes from the French word, égalité. Okay, égalité, that is egalitarianism. Egalitarianism, it is equality. Okay, but another very important word is equity. Equity is important because equity means, equal share, equity, equal stake, equal stake, equal share, equal distribution. So the word equity has a more, economic, has a more or a greater economic resonance. Okay. Whereas equality belongs more to the domain of social and political, egalitarianism, social and political sharing of privileges. But equity is more about the economic, the sharing of economic resources, economic privileges. Okay, I stop the class here, the lecture here. I stop it here because there are say 3 to 4 pages remaining. I don't think that I should be able to finish the entire discussion today in this lecture itself. So I propose to meet you once again next Monday, that is on 27th of April. Okay, I will meet you again on 27th of April. I shall first finish this discussion of Dr. Ambedkar's speech at Mahad, and then I will discuss, general issues, general problems, okay, which you might be facing when you read the other texts. My assignments like The Old Man and the Sea or say Samskara. Okay, so on 27th, we shall finish reading this text first and then take up some general questions. Some general questions. Now, do you have any question regarding this lecture? I hope, most of you were able to listen to what I said. I hope so. Give some feedback.
Yes, sir.
Sir, everything is clear. Everything is clear.
Yes, sir.
Uh,
Sir.
no, but is it really? It's a very poor internet connection. Maybe. Did it improve in
No,
course of
sir.
lecture?
No, sir. Yes,
No, sir, not at all.
No.
It's clear.
No, Porna, are you there? Porna? Porna,
Yes,
are you
sir.
there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm listening you.
Because earlier I think you had a problem of connecting, maybe during the lecture. I found it on
Yeah.
your feedback. Anyway, so do you have any question or any observation, any comment, anything? Have you attempted to
No, sir.
read this text? No? Have you read the
Yeah,
text?
yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you have shared it.
And have you read the study materials? Have you followed them? The study materials,
sir.
yes. The model questions, yes. And the
Yes, sir.
brief, answers, rather answer guidelines. Their guidelines. Tell me, Shumana, do you have any question? Shumana, do you have any question? Okay. Hey, I can't hear you. Your audio should be unmuted. Shumana, unmute your audio and ask me the question. Okay. Subhadeep, do you have any question?
Sir, I have read a paper regarding that women empowerment by B.R. Ambedkar. Is this
Ah.
related to something in this in this speech or not?
No, women empowerment is related to the idea of intermarriage once again. No, because intermarriage is definitely a very important way to empower untouchable women, because it also gives them an opportunity to mix with men of other castes. Okay. So from that point of view, intercaste marriage is in a way assertion of the self rights of women, particularly of the untouchable women. And women empowerment can also be in a way related to the idea of small cottage based handloom industries. Dr. Ambedkar had also been talking about rural economy, which can be
Yes.
in a way mostly driven by women, how they can contribute largely to the rural economy. And how untouchability, I shall come to that point later, it is there in the last part of his lecture, how untouchability is also the root cause of poverty of the untouchable people, because untouchability leads
job.
to, yes, leads to rejection of the untouchable businessman, untouchable entrepreneur, untouchable craftsman. So when you don't buy goods from them, their economy suffers. So that is another point that we will be discussing. Bikash, do you have a problem in connecting? No, Bikash is off.
Sir,
No, sir.
Yes, yes,
আপনি
Porna.
যে স্টাডি সঙ্গীতা
আচ্ছা, okay, tell me.
স্যার আপনি যে স্টাডি মেটেরিয়ালটা দিয়েছিলেন ওখানে একটা ফ্রেজ ছিল পিসফুল সোশ্যাল রিভলিউশন। স্যার ওটা তো একটা ইউটোপিয়ান কনসেপ্ট, মানে পিসফুল সোশ্যাল রিভলিউশন কি আদৌ মানে রিয়েলিটিতে সম্ভব?
The peaceful social revolution is definitely experimented rather by Gandhiji, because the idea of satyagraha itself is peaceful social revolution. No, because Gandhiji's ahimsa, the idea of ahimsa itself is part of peaceful social revolution. So how much it was effective is a different question. No, but it was definitely a way of political philosophy. It was definitely a way of political philosophy. It was practiced by Nelson Mandela as well in Africa. Okay. It was practiced by other people like Tolstoy in Russia. So peaceful social revolution is something which is utopian, definitely, but which utopia itself, utopianism itself is a kind of political philosophy. No, and utopia actually means highest aspirations. And
Yes,
you
sir.
would find in the lecture of Dr. Ambedkar, your aspirations should be highest. Otherwise, how would you implement? How would you be successful in your reform movement if your aspirations are not very high? So from that point of view, peaceful social revolution is difficult to achieve. It's difficult to achieve, but the power of non-violence is great. The power of non-violence is great for the perpetrators of violence would definitely be put to shame at one point of time. Okay, history has shown it, how they could be put to shame by the large scale massacre and mayhem of innocent people. So the aftermath of violence and bloodshed, okay, itself could be a great lesson for the perpetrators of violence. Think of the transformation from Chandashok to Dharmashok. How was it possible in the case of Emperor Ashoka? No, Chandashok to Dharmashok. You would say that it was possible through violent, yes, violent war. I agree, violent war. But once again, if you attack a non-violent man and injure him, and if he doesn't retaliate, psychologically speaking, okay, there will definitely be a psychological impact upon the perpetrator of violence, that is upon the attacker. Okay, he will definitely think about the consequences or the justification of his action. And if this is multiplied, that instead of one, if it is 1000, if it is 1 lakh, non-violent protesters, okay, then just consider what a great psychological impact it may have. Okay, that is a big question. Anyway, any more question?
I have one question.
Yes.
Sir, many years before, when some of the untouchables,
Ah.
because of the social discriminations,
Hmm,
they
hmm.
became the follower of Buddhism, leaving
Yes.
the Hinduism.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So at that time, now coming to the present scenario,
Yes.
at the same location, with, some untouchables, they are leaving the Hinduism and following the Buddha. After that, will they have to face the same problems, the same scenario what they were feeling being the untouchables when they were in Hinduism? Because I think nowadays untouchable is not a religious perspective.
Hmm.
It's become a thought of the people, that those who are having the torn clothes,
Hmm.
the persons, the pungent smell are coming from them, they are becoming the untouchables.
Hmm.
The people, those who are the vendors, those who are the seller selling their products just beside the roads, they are getting untouchables. And even you will see
Hmm.
the bus or in the train,
Hmm.
if a person
Hmm.
is snatching a purse,
Hmm.
he might be people, but at first we doubt that very person who is dark in complexion, or the smell, the pungent smell coming from that person.
Hmm.
So can we ever hope that the untouchability is might be going on from our Hinduism or from Hindu society?
So actually, there will be many new forms of untouchability. In fact, there had been many new avatars of untouchability in human history. Apart from this, Hindu untouchable idea, there had been many such ideas. For example, apartheid, that is discrimination based on the color of skin. Apartheid had been a very violent form of untouchability, because the black slaves were not at all touched or received or accepted by the white masters. They had to maintain a social distance. If you study the history of apartheid, you will find that it was as vicious as untouchability of Hinduism, or say the even the class based discrimination. If you look at the whole history of slavery, you will find that the treatment of the slaves was as pernicious as the treatment of the untouchables of Hinduism. And definitely, I agree with you. There are many new forms of untouchability. In fact, all of us have been thinking about the rise of the newest form of the untouchables, that the corona survivors. They will be the newest form of untouchables, because untouchability will now manifest in a new form altogether. The coronavirus patients, those who are now treated and then discharged, cured and discharged by the hospitals. Okay, when they return to their locality, they are not accepted by the people of their locality, and they are ostracized. And in many places, they are being violently treated. And the government is now thinking of bringing out a law whereby violence against the coronavirus patients will be treated as a penal offense. Okay, so definitely, untouchability has many layers. Okay, we are reading one form of untouchability in the context of Hinduism, and how this religious sanction was later, accepted in the broader social, political, and cultural domains, okay, and public domains, and how this religious sanction ultimately became a universal practice. Okay, we have been studying that history. Okay, we have been studying the origin and development of untouchability, a particular type of untouchability in the context of Hinduism. Okay, I hope I have been able to answer your question.
Yes.
Okay, okay, students. So let us call it a day. Huh? We shall meet once again on 27th. 27th at 3:30. Okay? Dhriti Bandana, is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sumana, Shubhadeep, Bikash,
Sir.
all of you. So
Yes, sir.
goodbye and take very good care of yourselves. Okay, stay at home These are very bad times, I tell you once again. Okay, so maybe we can experience a larger number of infected patients. So be very careful, I tell you. Be very careful. The last week of April and first week of May, be very careful. Okay. So we meet again once again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.